Good morning, everybody. We have a great presentation this morning. The last speaker was fabulous. I think it gave us a lot of food for thought. And as many of us may be staff members, but some of us are clinical leaders, nurse managers that are very interested in this content. This group panel this morning has done a lot of research on trying to come up with some competencies for nurse leaders in terms of nursing informatics. So it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce them to you. We're going to start next to me, and this is Mary Kennedy. Miss Kennedy is a board-certified nurse informatician who's interested in workforce development and clinical communication and collaboration in real-time health systems. She is currently the chair of ONL's Subcommittee on Nursing Informatics and Technology, which supported the development of the NICA, the work. I was like, how do you introduce that? Next, we have Sarah Collins. Dr. Collins is a clinical informatician in clinical informatics at Partners eCare here in Boston. And she's an instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Health Hospital Division of Internal Medicine and Primary Care. Her research includes developing and evaluating collaborative informatics tools to further patient safety, knowledge development, clinical decision support, and coordinated patient-centered care. Andy Phillips. Dr. Phillips is an associate professor at the Mass General Institute of Health Professions School of Nursing, where he teaches nursing informatics and research methods. He also holds an adjunct appointment as an assistant professor of nursing at Columbia University School of Nursing, teaching health policy. Dr. Phillips guided the collection methods for inclusion and validation of the competency items. Po-Yin Yen. Dr. Yen is a research assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Informatics and adjunct faculty member in the College of Nursing at The Ohio State University. And she's a nurse scientist at Ohio State Health System. Her areas of interest include HIT usability, evaluation, human-computer interaction, workflow analysis, and time motion study, data visualization, and systematic reviews regarding process improvement. And then we also have Stephanie Colman-Brochu. Stephanie is the manager of clinical applications and informatics at the Milford Regional Medical Center in Milford, Massachusetts. She is an active member of HIMSS and holds membership in ONL and AONE. She currently is a member of Meditech's Customer Patient Safety Advisory Board and previously served on their Nursing Advisory Committee. Her interests include the safe use and design of technologies to deliver high-value, quality care. Welcome, folks.
Hi, everybody. I get the fun job of kind of setting it up and kind of giving the big picture, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleagues to show you how we got to this place, which is very exciting. So I think most of you know, most of us have lived, really, the adoption of the EMR. And we've hit about 95% in the acute care areas. So, and what's really interesting is that we have a rapid rate of adoption and a functionality in the New England area is evidenced by this little graphic with the number of hospitals who have attested to level 6 and level 7 areas using the HIMSS MRAM model. There's a lot of support for nursing informatics nationally and locally. You know, one of the things that we can do is we can look out into our community and we can really, at this stage in our profession, find an abundant number of resources for nursing informatics. But when we start to look for nursing informatics resources specifically to the nurse leader, it gets a little thinner. And so what happened was that about in 2007, Mark Shagru and I were both members of ONL. I think at the time it might have been MONE. And we said, you know, we really would like to bring informatics and technology into this world. And so we talked to ONL, and they were very receptive in having us participate as a branch of their management of practice committee. So we started and they initiated a new nursing informatics and technology subcommittee. And we really focused on what can we do. So the first thing you do, of course, is do a needs assessment of the community. And then we did a lot of education. We also partnered with other organizations like HIMSS to bring the Nursing Informatics Institute into New England a couple of times. We also partnered with NENIC at that time. And then, of course, we would continue to look at where are the resources. And we would give periodic board updates. We would look at, there were some concurrent initiatives going on, mostly for the nursing informatics specialist, like the Tiger Project. But there was also a group, the Mass Action Coalition, that was looking at the future core competencies for the registered nurse. But still, we were looking for competencies specific to the nurse leader, because we felt, especially in that realm of O&L, this is what they were looking at to develop. And when we went to the board, they were very supportive of really looking at how we could define what we needed from a nursing informatics competency assessment for the nurse leader. And they were also very supportive of moving ahead and developing a psychometric valid tool. So it started with myself and Sarah, and then we invited Sarah's friends, Po-Yin and Andy from Columbia. And then what was really nice was that Stephanie was also a member of our O&L committee, and then she decided that she would put this into practice. So you can see how it kind of evolved. But my big takeaway from this was that what was really interesting is that we really started on a path to say, okay, we can do more educational programs within our professional organization, but let's develop something that people can use. Specifically, something that can be, for lack of a better word, delegated. You know, nursing leaders, nursing executives are very busy, but within their organizations, usually they have a large education and informatics staff, or at least a very efficient and effective ones. So let's really try to winnow down the world, try to boil the ocean, not boil the ocean, boil the ocean, and really define what are those skills that individuals need. And of course, you can imagine when you're starting a research project, we said, well, what is a nursing leader? And we said, we're not going down that path. We're going to be very broad. A nursing leader is anyone not doing bedside nursing and not a nursing informaticist. So it was very, very broad. So when we started to move into our data collection phase and those kind of stages, we knew who we were going to seek out and whose voice we wanted to hear to complement, to define those competencies and complement those already defined for the nursing informaticist. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah so she can discuss how we developed items, and then we'll go down and tell you how we developed the rest of the tool.
Thank you, Mary. So I'm going to talk about the early initial work that we did, and to kind of start this work, we performed a Delphi study. And so we're talking here about competencies, so good to start with a definition of what it is we're talking about. So we kind of looked towards one of the more recent definitions published of clinical informatics as opposed to biomedical informatics, but trying to focus on that. Clinical is not simply computers and medicine, but rather is a body of knowledge, methods, and theories that focus on the effective use of information and knowledge to improve the quality, safety, and cost effectiveness of patient care, as well as the health of both individuals and populations. And nursing informatics is a type of clinical informatics, right? Focusing on the nursing profession and using nursing science to drive that. And so what we did was look back at, okay, what has been published about nursing informatics competencies so far. And there was really great work done in 2008 by Wester and Delaney on informatics competencies for nursing and healthcare leaders. Again, focus on the competencies for the non-nurse informatician, so nursing leaders that aren't focused in informatics. There was also work published by Roy Simpson on state of contemporary informatics competencies for chief nurse executives. What's interesting about when you start looking at informatics competencies is technology changes really quickly. And so, you do need to update this work. In 2008, this was really great work done. But it included things such as how to use email. And, we're a bit beyond that. So we knew we had to refresh them, but this was exactly like the point to start from. We also wanted to make sure we were ensuring that the competencies that were developed were relevant to the nurse leader's work, right? So I am a nurse informatician, so the work that I do is not, the competencies maybe that I'm focused on are not what exactly the same as what is relevant to the nurse leader, a nurse, manager, a director, an executive. They may have, a different set of informatics competencies that are most relevant to them. So we wanted to ask them about those. So these are the methods that we used. Essentially, it's identification of the competencies and then factor analysis. And Po-Yin, Andy and Po-Yin are going to talk about the factor analysis to lead to a tool that can be used in a self-assessment type of way. And so what we first had to do was just clarify what in the world were we trying to measure, generate an item pool of that, determine the format for how to measure these, and then start to have that item pool reviewed by experts. And the review by experts was what we did the Delphi survey for. So based on past literature, that's how we started with the concepts we wanted to measure and what the initial items were. And then we moved on to the actual data collection in our Delphi survey. And this was in collaboration with O&L, and they were wonderful about helping us get this survey out there and nurse leaders to complete it. So we performed three rounds of a Delphi survey. So we used, I think we used RedCap software. So it was, online survey. They were able to, in the first 2 rounds, they were able to just say, yes, include this competency, or no, don't include it. It's not relevant to our work. And then there were always free text comments where they could write, well, it's not really worded clearly. I don't really understand what this is. Or they could comment on, yes, this is super relevant, and, for whatever reasons, or the opposite. In the 3rd round, we actually realized, we want like a little more information here about this level of relevance. So we actually used a 4-point Likert scale where they could rate it as not relevant, somewhat relevant, quite relevant, or very relevant. Between each round, kind of consistent with the Delphi technique, we modified the competencies. So if they were saying, in a pretty good consensus around rewording this item, then we would reword that item for the next round. And we would make it clear in kind of our like notes that were on this survey that they could read that this was reworded. And at each new stage of the Delphi, they could see everybody's comments from the prior stage. And so the intent of the Delphi is that you can get the group to come to consensus in a pretty efficient way. Well, still, it's online, but they can still see everybody else's comments, and so that may sway them a little bit, or it may not. And it's as opposed to all of us being in the same room and people, very vocal people chiming in with their idea, and then that's kind of all that you hear. So it's a way to more efficiently move to consensus while listening to everybody. And so for our analysis, we just replicated the methods that Western and Delaney had used in their approach, and that was using the content validity index. So essentially, it's just a way to calculate, given they answered on this Likert scale, how relevant actually is this competency? So we were able to then calculate this score and rank it. So the number of people that said, yes, it was quite and very relevant, and I think it's then divided by like the denominator of how many answered. And then you just are able to rank it. And the typical threshold is 0.8 or above, means it's relevant. So we also looked at the answers, and we did some statistics. We did some ANOVA statistics for just looking for differences among groups. So for instance, were the nurse leaders from community hospitals saying that some of these were relevant in a different way that nurse leaders from academic medical centers or critical access hospitals were? And then once we did the CVI, we also looked at some of those borderline ones just to make sure that we weren't, getting rid of some that perhaps we should keep in, at least for the time being, because this is a multi-step process, so we didn't want to be excluding things too early. This is essentially the sample of who completed each round. So we had between 26 and 41 people completing each of the Delphi surveys. So some of those are, the same people completing each round. And actually, we calculated that 33% of the people that completed the first round completed the second, and then 55% of the people that completed the second completed the third. So that's pretty good. Overall, most of the nurse leaders that were answering this worked for a hospital that did not have magnet status. Most of them were nurse executives. Most were from community hospitals. And then next after that were academic medical centers. And then most were pretty experienced. Most had more than 25 years of experience. And this kind of makes sense. Again, we're targeting the nurse leader, right? So that would be somebody typically with a fair amount of experience. Most had their master's degree. And then most rated their, and we called it health information technology instead of informatics, because we actually did want that broad concept in targeting the nurse leaders. That seemed more appropriate. But most rated that their knowledge was average or above average. Interestingly, most rated that they got that knowledge from on-the-job training. Which I think then speaks to, okay, well, there should be resources and tools such as this to support their learning while they're on the job. And most were self-learners too. They could select, this was a multi-select question. So many selected on the job and self-learner. So the results, essentially, we started with 108 competencies, and we ended with 74 competencies. Still, that's too many for somebody to fill out on an actual tool, which is why we needed the following steps after. But just to show this is kind of the state that we started from, the 74 competencies were categorized into these categories. So things such as management concepts, ethical, legal concepts, data issues, financial, health information technology selection, and then this is just the top 15 ranked competencies. So the first one, for example, is ability to assure that nursing values and requirements are represented in HIT selection and evaluation. And you'll see some of these competencies, many of them, most of them surface again, as Andy and Po-Yin talk about our next steps. So some of the phrasing of them continue to evolve as we evaluated more and kind of engaged more experts and then completed the actual psychometric analysis from this step. But this was important early work to try to identify what is relevant from the nurse leader perspective, and then we moved on to validate it. And so I think I'll open that up to Andy now.
Thank you. Since I'm speaking next, I'm going to be friend one of Sarah. Sorry, Po-Yin, but I get to be friend one. As Sarah had alluded to, a tool of 74 items is somewhat unmanageable, and so the goal was to how do we take those 74 items, make them into a more usable list, a more refined list, without losing the content, because a lot of work had gone into the content there, but we had that kind of balance. How do we make sure we maintain that content, what was identified as important, but yet turn this into a tool that was usable and that we could go out and validate as we move forward. So as Mary always says, now that she has, I think this is one of the first times I really met Mary, and since then I'm not Andy anymore, I'm now the methods guy. So I created this nice little picture, which is the methods guy picture of how to develop a tool. And I'm going to talk about how do we take those 74 items and get them down into a much smaller group, again with the goal of not losing what was out there and the information that was there before. So we used a method called the multi-voting method, which is a real method. I actually have a citation, so it exists. I didn't just make it up. And it's a way of consolidating, and I'll go into some more details later, but basically the goal is to consolidate like items, goal one, so try to eliminate things that feel duplicative, and then allow some kind of voting process to go through on, with experts to try to force people to whittle things down. So it's kind of forcing you to reduce things in one sense, and it's also trying to make sure you look at things and say, okay, yeah, they're kind of the same. Let's look at them together. So to go into some detail, that first goal, that consolidation and clarification, is basically you put all 74 items on a board, and you go one by one. And we did this on the phone and on some big long conference call, and took competency 1 and said, do we understand what this says? So just like in the Delphi study where there were opportunities to clarify, this is yet another opportunity to clarify what this competency said. So is the meaning of it clear? And then do we need to edit the language to make sure it's clear? So do we understand it? And hopefully will other people understand it when they read it? Again, this is a tool that's going to go out there and hopefully be self-done. So we better make sure that it's understandable. So then we go to the next item, and we ask ourselves, is the meaning of this item clear? And if it isn't, we edit the language. And then we ask that question, is it the same as the prior item or any of the other prior items that came before it? So we ask ourselves that question, does this fit with anything else that we talked about before? And if so, we consolidate those items together and maybe rewrite them again. So we end up with we've now eliminated an item. If it's not, we keep the item and we just kind of keep going through an iterative process like that. So that's the step 1. And then in step 2, which is that item voting, we ended up with, again, step 1 went from 74 down to 50. So we were able to combine and rewrite and rethink those 74 original items and bring them down to 50 items. So good work on our part to do that. So after we had those, we went through each of those, and again, this is the part where you force people to really prioritize what's important. So we said, we gave everyone an opportunity, and this was done separately, where we were given votes. We could only vote for half of them. We knew that wasn't the answer, but in the method, that is the real method, because I cited it, everyone gets about half. So we could each vote for 25 of them. That was it. And so we would each vote for 25 of them. We used a survey tool to do that. And then we created a report of kind of the most votes to the least votes. And we went through that same process. Are these the important ones? Have we missed anything? We kind of go through it. We might have to add back items. So we do this voting, but you know what? These ones that fell off, this one is still really important. Based on our expert opinion and based on what we learned in the Delphi piece, this is still a really important item. So we're going to put that back in and keep it. We're not going to eliminate it just because we're limited to 25 things. So going through that process, and we actually did that process through a series of 2 or 3 votes. So kind of going through and continuing to try to force ourselves to consolidate this list. And at the end of the day, we ended up with 45 items. So we went from 74 to 45 items. And we started to thinking about categories. Again, if it's a tool, we're going to start thinking about categories, and that kind of leads into the next step, which is that factor analysis to see if these categories actually stand alone and stand up. So we went from 74 to 50 to 45. And then I will hand it over, I believe, right? I'm done? Yeah, I think I am. Cool. And now we have friend 2. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm another friend. Doing the psychometric analysis part, so that's the most fun part. I have to appreciate it and let me do this part. Thank you. So because 45 items, can you imagine that, if we deliver it to our nurse leader and then they're able to, finish the 45 items, it's still too many of them. So that's why for a scale development process, we can scale it even more down, more of refine and then polish items by using the exploratory factor analysis. So this is an example exploratory factor analysis. You can imagine each of the dot is each of the items or questions. And then we try to figure out based on the data that we have, because we distribute the survey to the nurse leader. And then the data comes back, and then we use some statistical analysis to figure out what are those items relate to each other. So it's like a map. And then so for example, this map, you can see, oh, okay, that's about, there's some 3 factors over there because of some of the items, they are correlate with each other. So the factor analysis, the goal is to search for common clusters. Those clusters are meaning factors. Like what are the concepts out there to help us to identify, their competencies, like what are the concepts that are for the competency. And then distinguish between clusters, so meaning that there's a different factor, but we want to distinguish those factors as well, and then eventually to eliminate some irrelevance or overlapping items, meaning that some of the items, the question is not worded well, so it may load it to this concept and also not this concept, which means it's not really a good item or good questions, and then we need to eliminate it or think about a way to save it back. Based on our knowledge of informatics, what nurse leaders should have the informatics competency. So we go through different procedures. So this is rigorous procedures. First of all, we need to determine number of items. Second is try to identify extraction methods, meaning that that's how do we define that the factor should be correlated or not correlated. And then we go to the item reductions based on the Cronbach alpha reliability and then how factor they correlate, they overlap with each other. And then repeat a process until the final solution is reached. So this is the result. So we have total 539 response, but some of the response are not complete, meaning that they have some missing data. So we have to use more complete data for us to run exploratory factor analysis. So we have eliminate some of the response if they have more than 20% missing value, so that we can use that data for exploratory factor analysis. But because of the 357 responses have more than less than 20% missing value, however, only 216 response has no missing value. From the previous slide, we know we have 500 something, response. But if we only use the completed data, 216, we lose too much data already. We want to still retain as much as we can. So that's why we use expectation maximization is to impute those missing value. So, and then I do have reference as well, like saying this a rigorous process, and then this is recommended as well for us to impute those missing data. So first process is to determine the number of factors. There are references out there talking about how do we determine the number of factors. First one is the most common one, people use the eigenvalue greater than 1 rule, but it's a very data-driven process. And so we identify there's some other approach to identify the number of factors, more objective. So it's parallel analysis and model fit indices. So the eigenvalue greater than 1 rule is like this. So this is a scree plot. I think that if people have done factor analysis, you have the scree plot, and then you try to define where's the elbow, and then you determine like, okay, that's how many factors we're going to retain. However, this is very data-driven, meaning that based on your data, how many number of factors you're going to retain. Very objective as well. So there's some literature out there saying like there's any better way to do it. So this parallel analysis is not complete data-driven. It randomly pick the data we have and then generates more objective approach than to determine number of items. So based on the parallel analysis, it suggests 6 factors. And then the model fit indices is to based on the factorial structure to determine like how many factors we should retain. And then for the model fit indices, it recommends 6 to 7 factors we should retain. So based on all this, it was like, okay, so 6 factors, 5 factors, 6 to 7. So we try to assess, okay, now we're going to assess all the solutions that we have because we have the expertise. We cannot just rely on the statistic results to tell us what to do. We should balance it out, like based on the result and also our expertise to let us know, like, okay, what would be the most, reasonable competency for nurse leaders. So we assess the factor solution between 5 factor to 7 factor. We just lay out the solution to see which one make more sense. So the next step is to do the extraction methods. Mostly, like people would do the principal component analysis. However, for exploratory factor analysis, people recommend doing the principal axis factoring and then oblique rotation as well. So oblique rotation is a promax rotation, meaning that we assume the factor they correlate. If you do the Merrimax, meaning that you assume that the factor don't correlate. However, in the literature, so it says like using the oblique rotation is better, meaning that we assume that the factor they correlate. Because from the social behavior literature and also modern psychology reference as well, that they recommend that because it's a self-assessment tool, so we should assume always that the factor that they correlate. So this is how we do the factor solution comparison. So we lay out like 5 factor solution and then 6 factor solution, and then we compare to see, okay, which solution makes sense. So we ended up that we have 26 items, from 50 items to 26 items, and then we identified 6 solutions. And then the first factors that we found is about strategic implementation management, has 10 items. And then second one is advanced information management and education, 5 items. Executed planning, 4 items. Ethical and legal concept, 2 items. Information system concept, 3 items. Requirement and system selection, 2 items. So this is the solution we think makes sense. It makes more sense for us. And then we also did the factor correlation matrix. You can see like how they are not highly correlated. If they're highly correlated, meaning that they are pretty much the same factors. But this is kind of get us an idea of the factor structure, meaning this is a good structure for us to figure out, like, you know, the different concept and a different category for to assess the competency. And then we also did a combo alpha reliability. This is a reliability test, and then we have like 0.81 to 0.96, so that's pretty good scale. And then this is the factor loading for each of the factors. And then we have total 26 items. And we also get some feedback, you know, after the survey, and then we ask them to report, so what do you think about this survey? And then they say like 45 is too long, so we're right, it's too long. So that's why we need to cut it. And then we, scaled it down to 26 items. And then they still see there's some of the difficult language and terminology. When we did the survey, we did give them a choice to say don't understand. And then so, because we have this rigorous process, we really have that don't understand items, not many of them that select like 6 don't understand. If they select don't understand, we treat it as missing value. So they won't have to guess like 1 to 5, yeah. So they talked about, you know, we identified some of the comments about like nursing informatics education and trainings are needed. And then some of them, they kind of feel like, you know, there's a self-assessment part, but there's some part of it is really about EHR assessment. That's something that we, in the future, we need to think about, like when we send out this survey, it's about self-assessment or is it for EHR assessment? And then we need to clarify that as well. And then conclusion, so we have a valid and reliable nursing informatics competency assessment tool for nurse leader to use. And then future direction, we hope that, because this is one data set that we use to identify this reliability and validity of the tool. But, you know, who knows, and then as we have more data, then we may be able to refine it to even more and then to make it an even more solid tool for everybody. I think I'm done, so next is Stephanie.
Okay, so we're going to wing it here because I'm not sure which slides are up here. So, okay, so wrong way. Yeah.
Yeah, to switch to the another one. It's on the desktop. Yours on the desktop.
Did you end it for that one?
Which one is it?
Is this not this one here?
We probably should have kept the question about how to use a computer.
How to version control.
Just giving you a hard time.
Yeah, last night you wanted to put a chip in my head, so.
I did, yeah.
That was good, you know.
There we go. Teamwork
Yay, here we go.
and just-in-time revisions.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm here to talk a little bit about actually using the tool in practice. So as we know, technology has really touched everything we do, the way we live, work, and communicate. Not one of us here has been untouched. You know, as a nurse, think about all the different things we have. You know, practicing nurses, we have barcode med, we have ASCOM phones or Volt phones. You know, we have sophisticated telemetry devices. We have very sophisticated EHRs. As nurse leaders, now we have acuity tools. We have sophisticated management software. So it goes on, and it's just going to continue. I like to call it the information. It's been termed the information revolution, but I call it an evolution because that means that we're evolving as creatures and as leaders. So just it's important to know that as nurses, we have this really close and sustained relationship with our patient, and we are the largest users of technology. You know, and everything that we do now in nursing is really integrated with some of these very sophisticated tools. At the time, I was doing my DNP out at UMass Worcester, and I was working with the then CNIO, who now has moved up to the system CNIO, AVP, Pam Manor, up at UMass. And they were in the process, are still in the process, of implementing a very sophisticated EHR, Epic. And this is a $700 million, probably going to be a $1 billion project when they're done. So obviously they're investing a significant amount of money and resources to make this a successful project and integrate across their very vast empire. What we found were, as we were going through this, working with Pam, that they really were lacking some of the data that was needed about whether or not the nurse leaders there were competent and were they well equipped to deal with this new tool, and were they going to be able to achieve some of those strategic goals that they had for this project. So the purpose of the study that we did was to examine the nurse leader's self-report of competency, and this really was to provide us with some data to inform practice improvement and educational opportunities as they move forward. For me, I wasn't one of the friends, I'm a tag along. I just happened to be, Pam and I were looking at different tools and looking at how we were going to assess them, and as they were talking about, there weren't a lot of tools out there that were current to do what we wanted to do. And we happened to be on a call, one of the technology meetings for ONL, and Pam was on the other line and I was on the other line, and we were texting each other at the same time as Sarah and the group were talking about their tool, and I was like, I'm going to call them, I want that, I have to have it. So with some good timing and some gentle persuasion, I was allowed to use this tool. So we had 4 research questions that we really wanted to address. Do the nurse leaders have the needed competencies to use this medical record? How prepared are they to really utilize and collect data and make decisions? And were there a relationship between the groups in their self-reported competency in informatics? And were there any differences between age, years in position, years of experience, or education? This went through IRB. It was approved, expedited review, minimal risk. Data was confidential. It was reported at the aggregate level. So my methods, it was a cross-sectional descriptive study. We had a convenience sample of 147 nurses at the time that either met the inclusion criteria or exclusion criteria. Setting was at the 4 different campuses at UMass Memorial Health System. If anybody knows, they have many, many ambulatory centers. They have 6 hospitals. We focused it onto the 4 campuses that were in the immediate Worcester area. Recruitment was done through email. It was an invitation to participate. A survey link was sent out. And we collected data over a 3-week period. Our analysis was done using SPSS, Statistical Package for Social Sciences. We used descriptive statistics to describe the population and chi-square to do differences among the groups. So our results, let's get right to the chase. We had 55 nurse leaders who I want to thank each and every one of them for completing the survey, which gave us a response rate of 37%. I was going for 60, but I was told this was good. I'm a bit of an overachiever sometimes. So this is some of our sample characteristics. The majority of respondents came from the role of nurse manager. That was about 36%. The sample characteristics, the average age of the respondents was 50, which actually is consistent with the average age of the nurse, the national age of the nurse. And our education, this was a very highly educated population. 67% had a master's degree that responded. And that, really is in keeping with the IOMs to have 80% with a bachelor's degree by 2020. So really, this sample was well on the way to achieving that. The characteristics as well, years of experience, they were well experienced. The mean was 25.3. The biggest number of respondents came from those with 30 years or more. Years in position, the highest responders were those in the position from 1 to 5 years, which was a little surprising. That was 58%. So what we did was looked at the data. It was on a Likert scale, so it was a 6-point Likert scale. 0 being not competent, 5 being very competent, and 6 being don't understand. And so what we found were that nurse leaders overall felt very competent in certain areas, but anywhere from 40 to 50% in these different competencies. The ethical collection of, the ethical principles for collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of data and information related to HIT, about 50% or more. Nurse leaders also reported less competency in a number of areas, which allowed the organization to kind of target some educational opportunities. And a lot of that was related to the finances and how do you manage the finances over a long term with technology. The results also showed no differences by educational level or years in position, but we did find differences between age, years, working experience, and professional position. So nurse leaders 60 or older reported more competency in the ethical principles for using and collecting data. Position, I got the 10-minute warning, so I'm going to fly through now. Position, the senior executive nurse leader reported more competency in several key areas. Finances was one, conceptual understanding of data quality issues, and about policy and procedures. Years of experience, the nurse leaders with 31 or more years of experience reported greater competency in 2 key areas, ethical principles and in recognizing the value of clinical involvement in all appropriate phases of HIT, and I think that's pretty significant at this organization. Years of experience, what was surprising was the nurses with less than 10 years of experience reported greater competency in several key areas, really about communicating a nursing and system vision about the benefits of health IT, and about championing the collection, analysis, and trending of nursing data in non-nursing dominated discussions related to HIT, and about managing change, which to me, that actually wasn't as surprising. And the ability to evaluate, contribute, revise the project scope, objectives, and resources. So what we found were that overall the nurse leaders at UMass had many of the informatics competency that were needed, that the senior nurse leaders and nurse leaders with a number of years of experience reported greater competency in several key areas, and the less experienced nurses reported some greater competency in the ability to manage change and communicate nursing vision and data. So UMass was able to take some of this and use it to hopefully use some of this to target some educational opportunities. And it was interesting, after I had given my results at UMass, the graduate school, 2 days after, I got a call from them asking them if I would share my data, because they had having a discussion about the finances in the long term, projecting the costs, and did the leaders there understand what what's going to take to finance this total cost of ownership over 10 years. And they wanted my data to support the fact that they believed that they weren't. So I was more than happy to share that with them. But just, I stole this. I got a reference, Tiger. Information technology really is the stethoscope of the 21st century. And what we found, I think, that nurse leaders are better prepared than 10 years ago, but we still need to do much more. I mean, the technology really does change, and as they pointed out, you know, there is a vast difference between what was done with Staggers, Gas and Current in 2001 and what we've done with Webster and Delaney, and just to see the evolution. I'm very happy to have added some validity and reliability to their tool, and so I want to thank them for that. And the limitations, obviously, were it's a new instrument, small sample size. The results are really not generalizable because it was limited to one academic center. And some of these results, because they were in the middle of their design and build phase, there may have been a heightened awareness of some of these key competencies and stuff like that. So that's it.
A couple of things before we open them up. A couple of things just to kind of transition, in that we are going to look at NICA-NL, Nursing Informatics Competency Assessment for the Nurse Leader. And the goal really was to provide a tool that could be done individually, within a group, or within an organization. And we're moving toward that. We're developing a scoring metric. Maybe Andy and Po-Yin might talk about a little about that. We need to do some further analysis and really looking at deployment. And in addition to UMass Medical, we're also have been successful at introducing this at partners, and Andy can talk about his initiative there. In addition to that, because the idea is that we do, you know, ANCC has one for nursing informaticists. We have just finished one for nursing leaders. The next one is to do one for registered nurses, which we have completed data collection, and so we hope to have that analysis done, hopefully maybe by the end of the summer or early fall. These are all non-funded projects because we think they're important, so funding would be nice to figure out how we could get some funding to share this information mostly. And I think that it really, I think also the next step is really looking at polarity, kind of both and then looking at these competencies, because this is a study of what nurses said is important to them. It's a nursing assessment. But I think there's probably a gap between what IT and what organizations in the Real-Time Health Center think is important. So I think we need to really bring those two worlds. So the initiative was to give some definition and also to look at, if we've done for the registered nurse, the nurse leader, and the nurse informatician, I think there probably is also some special needs within the nursing executive community, but now we have some data that we might be able to look at that and open those conversations. I wanted to also do a couple of thank yous, in that we were able to do the statistical analysis because, as we discussed, it started off as an O&L initiative, but we were able to invite people nationally, and Jane was one of the organizations that invited her staff to participate, as well as Marilyn Chow out at Kaiser, Catholic Health West, Dignity Health, and the California Nurses Association. So it really allowed us to leverage some of our relationships so that it wasn't just another interesting survey that we couldn't develop reliability and validity. So that was really important and a huge accomplishment to us. The other thing is, Stephanie kind of mentioned with some cajoling, because there's always that balance, you want to publish and get it out, but we thought, the biggest challenge to our group was have an idea and how fast can you execute it to implementation. And so we thought that it was worthwhile, but we are proud to say that we were just published in Jonah in the April and May publication, and Leslie Nicole was nice enough to talk to her sister organization. And if you go out to Jonah and look up the NICA study, you can download it for a limited period of time for free. So you can download it to your sites. We'd like to thank Leslie for doing that. And with that, I'll open to questions. And with that, here are some links so you don't have to work that hard to find the article. And we'd like to open it for a few questions and then get to bingo and to our sponsors.
I knew I was going to get right up here and ask you a question. I don't know any of these people. This is just disclosure. But I ambushed Mary as soon as I got here because I read this article and I was like, oh my God, I loved it. It was so good. Thank you for the work that you have done, from a novice researcher to somebody who's walked through that process. It's really good work. You did a really great job at explaining what you did, and I don't see that very often in articles. I did want to say that.